Mystic Fighters was the fifth deck build pack released on the Yugioh TCG. While previous sets of this style had yielded interesting archetypes and on occasion meta-defining strategies such as Sky Striker and Prank Kids, Mystic Fighters didn't really do that. Out of the set's three premier archetypes, Math Mech appeared to have the most potential, but fell out of use in favor of more powerful cyber strategies such as Ad-Ignister. Dragon Maid has been relegated almost exclusively to an extender in Dragon Link, and poor Generaider lost its best power play of using True King of All Calamities to the Forbidden Unlimited list. Thanks, Virtual World. But do these Nordic nobles still have something to offer after BFD has fallen? Let's load up our save and see. Generaider cards feature many synergies outside of just sharing a name. Aesthetically, they are based off of the legends of Norse mythology, while from a mechanical perspective, they place your opponent into the role of a video game protagonist, on a campaign throughout the 9 realms of said Norse mythology, while defeating each realm's quote-unquote boss. While most of the deck's monsters possess a variety of types and attributes, almost all of them are consistently level 9. You can also only control one of each different monster, and various card effects have a small focus on when your opponent draws, either having effects that trigger when your opponent adds a card from their deck to their hand, or making your opponent draw. Yeah, I know it sounds bad to give your opponent free cards, but that's because it is. Don't worry, as there are ways to circumvent these downsides. The Generaider game plan, like those of Toon or Mystic Mine, revolves around a specific field spell. This field spell is Generaider Boss Stage, which represents Yggdrasil, the world tree and home to the 9 realms of Norse mythology, and is the most important card in the deck. If you do not have this, your game plan is to find it and find it fast. Fortunately, this deck has plenty of ways of finding it, so that shouldn't be a problem. As for why this card is so important, its effects are thus. First, when your opponent adds a card from their deck to their hand, you can special summon a Generaider monster from your deck once per turn. This includes your opponent drawing for their draw phase, so at the start of every turn, you get a fresh new boss to challenge them. Its second effect is that if you ever manage to summon a Generaider monster during your opponent's turn, say by the effect of a certain field spell, then you can once per turn fill the rest of your monster zones with Generaider tokens, which are light level 4 fairies with 1500 attack and defense. While the tokens don't stay around for your turn to make easy link fodder, almost every single one of your bosses has a quick effect that requires tributing monsters to activate, so this gives you easy fodder. It's just like a ruler to sacrifice their own minions to achieve their ends. Although notably, neither of Boss Stage's effects are mandatory, so if you feel it's better to hold them for a later point in turn, or even activate the effects independently of each other, you could do that. Would I recommend it? Well, synergy exists for a reason. Starting off the main deck roster is Generaider's only normal summon, Lapter, who is not exactly a boss, but merely exists in their shadow. Based off the legendary backbiter himself, Loki, calm yourselves, fangirls. Lapter is a level 4 light fairy with 1500 attack and defense. Lapter's first effect is granting every Generaider monster on your field an extra 1000 attack and defense points during your opponent's turn, pushing not only Lapter, but also all your tokens to a respectable 2500. And can push some of your bosses above 4,000. Unfortunately, this doesn't make pushing for lethal any easier because, like the tokens, you don't keep the attack points on your turn. However, speaking of those tokens, Lapter has the first effect that can properly utilize them. During either player's main phase, Lapter can tribute one Generaider monster to summon any other Generaider monster from your deck. This can include the tokens as they are specifically named Generaider Token and thus are part of the archetype. Lapter's fire attribute is an interesting design choice since Loki is never represented as having a fire relationship, but I suppose it's fine. The first stage in our travels gives us a proper look at one of these legendary bosses, the one who rules over the realm of Vanaheim, Mardell the Boss of Light. Based off of Freya, the Norse goddess of beauty, Mardell is a light plant with 2400 attack and defense, and when she's summoned, you can add any Generaider card or plant monster except herself to your hand. Mardell is unique in a number of ways. First off, she's the only boss that doesn't tribute monsters to activate one of her effects. She also demonstrates a unique property of Generaider effects not seen on Lopter. While Generaider monsters can support their own archetype, they can also theoretically support every single type that they're assigned. So for instance, Mardell here, being a plant, can search plants. While you don't often want to summon Mardell off of boss stage as she lacks most forms of interaction, she can help you get to it. You see, if you just normal summon Lopter, you can use its own effect to tribute himself, which can then summon Mardell from deck, and then Mardell's effect will allow you to search for a copy of boss stage. The second stage in our travels takes us to Svartalfheim, home of the dwarves. Behold Dovelgis, the boss of iron. Dovelgis is an earth machine with 1500 attack and 2500 defense, and can tribute any number of monsters to summon the same number of Generaider monsters from your hand. While not based off of any specific Norse myth, Dovelgis does fit into the theme of the dwarves, as Norse dwarves tend to be prolific crafters. While you don't want to play Dovelgis, the fact that it's one of the few ways to get a boss that's stuck in your hand onto the field requires that you play at least one copy. However, it is one of the deck's few ways of getting multiple bosses onto the field at once. The third stop in our trip is Muspelheim, home of the fire giants. Now behold Naglfar, the boss of fire! Based off of the gatekeeper of Muspelheim, Surtur, Naglfar is a fire beast warrior with 3100 attack and 200 defense. While that stat line does make it a rekindling target, it is the only one in the deck. However, it does have the highest base attack stat out of all the Generaider monsters. Naglfar can also protect cards you control from being destroyed by destroying monsters you control. That's right, not only does it only protect from a form of removal that is actively getting worse each and every day, it also doesn't actually tribute the monsters, so any synergies you might have from cards that plus you off of tributing won't activate. Although notably because it destroys, Naglfar can be a funny Tekken Fire King. Oh. Stage 4 is a bit of a disappointment. Welcome to Niflheim, a land of ice, just ice. As far as I can tell, nothing lives here, though it is said to be the source of all rivers. The boss isn't even from here. Nidhogg, the boss of ice, is based off of Nidhogger, a dragon that lives on the world tree itself and feeds off of its roots. As for the card itself, Nidhogg is a water worm with 2100 attack and 2600 defense, and can tribute a monster to prevent an inherent summon, such as a Link summon. This can be useful, but often main deck space can be better utilized with other bosses. The fifth stage of our journey takes us to the home of the Light Elves, Alifheim. Behold Frodi, the boss of swords! Based on Freyr, the god of peace, Frodi is a wind warrior with 2500 attack and 2000 defense, and he can tribute any number of monsters to target and destroy the same number of monsters your opponent controls, and then let your opponent draw the same number of cards as you destroyed. Putting aside the fact that this draws your opponent cards, so many things nowadays either resist targeting or destruction, looking at you, Dragoon, or float upon being destroyed, that removing them often doesn't lose your opponent any advantage, while you sacrifice a large part of your board as cost. Add to this that there is a much better boss for removing problem cards that doesn't draw your opponent cards, and Frodi is just terrible. Time for stage 6, the home of the Jotun, Jotunheim. Behold Utgarda, the boss of delusion. Utgarda is a light rock with 2200 attack and 2700 defense, and contribute 2 monsters to target and banish any card. That's right, Frodi, you got beat by a house. Well, not just any house, but a legendary Jotun fortress. Not that that makes it any better. Not only is this the deck's best form of removal, it is a hilarious tech choice in Adamantipator. Utgarda not only doesn't give your opponent a draw and banishes instead of destroys, but it can also target any kind of card, just to get rid of those pesky Scarlet Sanguines. with the chicken just active. Just don't think about it too hard. Welcome to Stage 7, the land of the dead Helheim. Kneel to Hela, the boss of doom. A dark zombie with 800 attack and 2800 defense, Hela can tribute a monster to summon a monster from your graveyard. Hel, the queen of the dead and daughter of Loki, carries this relation into card form, with Lopter and Hela both tributing to summon a Generaider from wherever you need. In Hela's case, she can be used to recycle a boss who you may have used previously and you need to use again. She is also one of the deck's other ways of putting up multiple bosses in one turn. Finally, it's the one you've been waiting for. Stage 8, Asgard, home of the Aesir. Now kneel to the boss of storms, Har. Har is a dark spellcaster with 3000 attack and defense and 2 effects. The first effect is triggered whenever your opponent adds a card from their deck to their hand outside of their draw phase, and forces them to send one monster from their hand or field to the graveyard. Those of you with a cursory knowledge of Towers format may realize that this effect has the exact same wording as Apocalypse Port Towers. And that's in addition to the second effect, which allows Har to tribute 2 monsters for an Omni Negate. This is the best boss in the deck, and you run no less than 2. Being based off of the Allfather Odin, this level of power is really fitting. Now prepare yourself for the final world, Midgar, and the only Generaider extra deck monster. Tremble in fear of Jormungandr, Generaider Boss of Eternity! This rank 9 Earth Reptile can be made with as few as 2 level 9 monsters, and gains 1000 attack and defense points for each Xyz material it has. Once per turn as a quick effect, the mighty World Serpent can detach 1 material to force both players to draw 1 card, and then attach 1 card from their hand or field to it as more material, causing a net gain in material every time. It's a pretty alright card. While it can trigger boss stage on your turn, you won't get the tokens because it's on your turn, and your opponent will often choose to just give you their worst monster, so it doesn't really hand rip for much. Often this ends up being little more than a slight inconvenience to your opponent. I can see this card's merits, and I suppose you aren't exactly pressed for space in your extra deck if you wanted to play it. Now for the deck's spells. Generaider Boss Quest is the deck's primary search spell. Upon activation, you reveal and then shuffle a Generaider monster from your hand into the deck, and then add 2 Generaider spell or trap cards from your deck to your hand with different names. With all the bosses you're likely to be playing, having one in your hand often enough to meet the activation requirement of this spell should rarely be an issue. And this card can search 2 cards instead of most deck searchers traditionally getting 1. In addition, both this card and a monster you can shuffle back to activate it can both be searched by Mardell, which means that if you need it, you can just search it out. Generaider Boss Loot is a continuous spell that protects your Generaider effect monsters from being targeted for attacks while there is a token on the field. However, if your opponent ever manages to destroy one of your bosses by battle, your opponent gets to draw. I like this card for flavor reasons, as it is almost a perfect representation on how enemy loot drops would work in a card game. While the flavor is cool, letting your opponent draw a ton of free cards is bad, and for protection that will rarely come up on monsters so big. In fact, most of these cards' effects will never come up, so even in a casual meta, you're just staring at this card wanting it to do something. I hate that this card is bad. It just seems so cool. I bet that box is only a common drop too. We start our trap lineup with Metaverse, or this deck's version of it, Generaider Boss Fight. This normal trap will first activate a copy of Boss Stage from your deck or graveyard, then immediately make your opponent draw a card. While it can only get Boss Stage, it more than makes up for that limitation. First off, it's not at 1. Second, it can also pull Boss Stage out of the graveyard, so you'll almost always have a Boss Stage to pull. While it does allow your opponent to draw, by examining the problem-solving card text on Boss Stage, we can notice that while summoning the tokens is a hard once per turn, summoning the bosses is a soft once per turn. And since you're activating a brand new boss stage before your opponent draws, any copy of Boss Fight is essentially just a free new boss. Add to that, if Har is on the field before you activate Boss Fight, then he will also trigger off of the draw, denying your opponent the resource. Never play this card at any less than 3, and never play Trap Trick at any less than 3. This gets the field spell, you need the field spell, it's a good card. Generaider Boss Room is a continuous trap that represents a unique form of interaction. If your opponent chains to any Generaider card effect, you can discard a card to replace that effect with both players draw a card. This effect can protect boss stage or any other critical piece of interaction your opponent is attempting to stop, and even lets you draw as well, replacing the advantage you spent activating the effect. A well-designed boss lair if I ever saw one. The final Generaider card is Generaider Boss Bite, and it's a weird one. It tributes any number of Generaider monsters to attach that same number of monsters to any Xyz monster you control from your hand, field, or graveyard, as long as you don't attach the monsters you tributed. Similar in design philosophy to cards like Melfi Playhouse, Boss Bite serves as an extra effect for Jormungandr. In particular, its effect to utilize boss stages tokens. While you do often have at least a few bosses in your graveyard over the course of a game, giving them to the big snake just for a big attack value is rarely what you want out of a trap. Although, since it doesn't limit the kinds of Xyz monsters this can be used with, the potential does exist in Xyz-focused builds for giving all manner of Xyz monsters much more material than they're supposed to have. With this card, I can certainly see the potential to take a bite out of the competition. A standard Generaider core consists of 3 Lopters that X only normal summon, 1 to 3 Har, as he is the most powerful boss, and 1 of each of the rest of the bosses except for Frody and Naglfar because they're terrible, and if you need any of the others more than once, Hela can be used to revive them. For spells and traps, you include 3 Boss Stage, 1 Terraforming to find your 3 Boss Stage, 3 Boss Fight to find your 3 Boss Stage, and 3 Trap Trick to find your 3 Boss Fight, which finds your 3 Boss Stage. 1 to 3 Boss Quest, depending on how often you want to get a Bricky Generaider out of your hand, and 1 Boss Room as an additional search target if you already have Stage. However, using ratios like this leaves a lot of empty space in your deck, so how do we properly utilize this? Being a control deck, you might be tempted to start jamming a lot of counter traps such as Solemn Judgment and Warning. However, since Trap Trick is already being used in the deck to find a boss fight faster, it is often more consistent to use powerful normal traps, such as Infinite Impermanence or Ice Dragon's Prison. Notable cards for consistency are the pots, specifically Extravagance and Prosperity. Generaider rarely requires its extra deck to properly function, and the added chance of seeing key cards is often worth the trade-off. Prosperity in particular is quite good, as you can still run extra deck monsters that you want to summon, and just keep 6 that you specifically banish for Prosperity, or just simply run corner case ones like Nightmares. And you only really need that one extra piece of interaction in this deck to fully lock out the opponent. Kujikiri Curse can be used to easily increase consistency, and Hela can even recover the bosses you pitch for it. Trieste Hierarchica can theoretically be used as a recurrent piece of interaction, however it does eat up most of the tokens you would rather use for your boss's effects. As for additional extra deck options, Infinitrack Earth Slicer serves as yet another better version of Frody. 3100 attack can get over some big monsters that Har would otherwise have trouble getting over, and it doesn't draw your opponent a bunch of cards. Phantom Fortress Enter Blenthanier can get around targeting protections that Garda can't, or can just hand rip. And finally, the current big rank 9 payoff, the Nature Negator himself, Sacred Tree Beast Hyperion. While you will likely only end up with monster negates off of him, it's still a powerful tool. One last card I would be remiss to not mention in this section is World Legacy Monstrosity. Either of its effects can be useful in this deck to either free a boss stranded in your hand, or give you extra Xyz material or just more bosses for interaction. But jamming generic staple cards can only do so much. It is my opinion that what Generaider truly needs is a proper partner in a supplemental engine. To start off, the Invoked package can find success here. You don't require boss stage to be up during your initial setup phase, So you can simply activate Meltdown at the start of your turn to get Alistair, do your invoked combos, and then put Stage over Meltdown as you're ending your turn. Not to mention, Mechaba is a level 9 monster, in case you need an extra material for your Xyz monsters. There are various simple combos that can end on Red Eye's Dark Dragoon that could very easily be run. Dragoon is a big boy with a big negate, and you can often spare a card from your hand for that negate. However, I find sitting on Dragoon to be boring, so please don't. An interesting choice is a Dogmatica package. Since all you're really doing on your turn is activating a spell and setting a bunch of cards most of the time, you don't really care about locking yourself out of the extra. Plus, you can get 2 extra pieces of interaction in the form of Fleur-de-Lis and Punishment. For some extra synergies, both Ecclesia and Fleur are spellcasters, which means that Har can tribute them to fuel his Omni-Negate even when the tokens would disappear on your turn. This can make Har a persistent threat for your opponent rather than just on their turn. In summary, Generaider is a cool deck with a unique playstyle that I just wish was better. I hope you all enjoy using this info to smite your friends with the Norse Pantheon so hard that the sight of terraforming makes them go, "Why do I hear boss music?" Goodbye, and until next time.